They have unfinished business to take care of from last tournament, and I think that magic continues.
Welcome to the Sports Forecasters podcast. Thank you for tuning in today. This podcast has been created not to dwell and over-evaluate what has already happened in the sports world, but to predict and to forecast what has yet to come. From game picks to draft picks, and from trades to free agent signings, we will let you know what happens before it happens. Your hosts, Nick and Nate, will evaluate, study, and understand sports patterns, tendencies, and nuances to better prepare you on what to expect. Just like weathermen, but way more accurate. So if you like to pick games, or you simply just want to be in the know before anybody else, you are in the right place. Enjoy the show.
Hey everybody, welcome to the next edition of the Sports Forecasters podcast. This is your host Nathan with my co-host Nick Alvarez. As always, the same people, we have never changed. How are you doing today?
Little disgruntled after looking at brackets and Joe Flacco going to the Eagles, but that's a whole nother issue. We can get into that one later.
I did not know this.
Yep, they signed him. I'm just like, yeah,
Jalen Hurts will get hurt the first play of the season, and you're going to have to ride on Joe Flacco's shoulders the rest of the year.
Maybe we'll have a top 5 pick then, or maybe we'll have that regardless. We'll see what happens there.
You might have that regardless.
But that's another subject for another day. We have some madness to disseminate and look at, Nathan. So let's recap how our brackets are looking after 4 days of, quite honestly, excitement. What did you have happening with your brackets, Nathan?
Yeah, so first off, I will say this. I am on top of our little bracket challenge we got for this podcast. So remember the rules. You got to beat us if you want to be a guest on this show. So we'll see if that pans out. But right now I have a narrow lead. We'll see if that even holds and how long it does. But looking back, there are things I did right. There are things I did wrong. And I kind of want to break that down here a little bit. So first off, so I can end on a more positive note, let's look at what I did wrong first, right, to get that out of the way. I really missed on the Pac-12, and I don't think I'm alone in saying that, but we've said it on past shows. We just never really watched the Pac-12 play basketball because we have families, we have kids, we have full-time jobs. We're not staying up super late to watch the Pac-12 on the East Coast. So I don't have much let's say data points on them to make a good evaluation. So I was just shocked to see how well they did. Completely underrated them. I was really talking up the ACC as well during this tournament. I had North Carolina going pretty far. I had Virginia Tech going pretty far, for example. Clearly the ACC was awful. And I don't even know if there's any ACC teams left, to be honest. Look at these brackets. But it was just, I thought, there's Florida State is the only one. But in Syracuse. Florida State and Syracuse are the only two. But I thought like North Carolina would make a little bit more noise. That didn't pan out. I thought Virginia Tech would make more noise. So I missed there as well, but not fully. I did get Syracuse correct and Florida State correct in the Sweet 16. But I think one of the biggest things is the Big 12. I missed there. Oklahoma State. I mean, that was my sleeper pick there to get to the championship, and they laid an egg against Oregon State. I mean, they were down 20 in the first half, and I never lose confidence in this team because they're a second half team. They always come back, and they did come back, but it was just too much to handle. The Pac-12 just seems completely unstoppable right now. So it's just bad matchup, bad timing, and they had to pack their bags. So that was a little disappointing. And then obviously seeing Texas lose and any of these other Pac-12 teams lose is just slightly overrated. So but the one thing that I did nail was the Big Ten. For most of the season, I thought the Big Ten was going to be the best conference in this tournament. And at one point, I even said there will be 2, maybe even 3 Big Ten teams in the Final Four. As we got closer to the selection show, and as I started to watch them in the tournament, or in their conference tournaments, I started to think much less of them. I thought they were probably the second best conference behind the Big 12. I definitely reflected the Big Ten to do poorly in this tournament, but they're even doing more poorly than I projected. For example, I had Purdue losing in the second round. They lost in the first round. I had Ohio State losing in the second round. They lost in the first round. I had Illinois losing in the Sweet 16. They lost in the second round. So I had Maryland losing right away. They bounced out in the second round. I did have Iowa going to the Elite Eight. That was the big surprise. So I thought Iowa and Michigan would maybe represent the most out of all the Big Ten teams. Right now, it just looks like Michigan has that best shot at moving forward. The Big Ten was exposed. And during this COVID season, when you really only play your conference opponents, you don't really play the interconference, it's really hard to judge these teams. And just looking at the style of play, and I was watching all the conference tournaments, just watching the Big Ten play, they seem much weaker than I anticipated them to be, and that's why I had a lot of them bouncing early. And I think that's the main reason why my bracket has done well in our little bracket challenge we're doing, and also the one I'm doing at my work, because obviously we live in Northwest Ohio. It's Big Ten country, and a lot of them had the Ohio States and the Iowas and the Illinois going very far, and I had them being bounced early, and I did seem to hit that fairly well. So that's where I found most of my success in my bracket so far. Nick, what about you? What are some things that you missed, and what are some things that you nailed?
Well, to start things off, what I missed was what you alluded to just at the end there. I was high on the Big Ten. I fell for it. And like you alluded to, and we alluded to off air here, it was just fool's gold for the pure fact there was no interconference play this season due to COVID. So we didn't see them match up very often against teams outside of the Big Ten. So in the Big Ten, in a vacuum, they look great. They look like juggernauts against each other, look like they're just beating each other up. And that had me buying into the hype. I felt like as a conference, they would do well. Fortunately, I did taper those expectations and I didn't go gun ho like you described some of your coworkers. I did have some of them bouncing around the Sweet 16 area, so it didn't destroy my brackets, but I did not have a strong first day showing, which was frustrating to say the least. But fortunately, because I tapered those, it saved my bracket to where I'm projected to score as many points as Nathan, but right now I'm trailing a little bit because the first round just kind of tore me up because I thought Big Ten teams, they can manage to get one win each, relatively speaking, and that was not the case. And then also something I missed on was, and I feel like the nation at large missed on, is the Pac 12. Who would have thought they would have done as well as they have up to this point, winning as many games as they have and advancing as many teams as they have up to this point? It was just shocking. I will say the one thing I did hit on, getting USC to the Sweet 16. When I did that, picking them over Kansas, I guess that's my one thing I hit on, quote unquote. That would have been unexpected. But I mean, besides that, I feel like everything else I've hit on could be rationalized to be well within reason. The big thing I'm looking forward to, and I know I'm kind of jumping the gun here, is that Michigan Florida State game. That is not that any of these Sweet 16 games are not going to be fun to watch, but that one should be a really good one, or I hope it'll be a really good one. That kind of leads me to what we're going to hit next, folks. We're going to go into looking at who do we have left, and we're going to do another forecasting here, just like we've talked about before. When things change and the landscape changes, just how it has here in this tournament, we're going to look at the Sweet 16, how it's currently comprised, and see who do we pick to move on. Now, that won't change the brackets we did for our contest, but we're going to try to project who we think based on who is currently in, kind of like the second chance brackets they have on ESPN. We're going to do our second chance brackets based on the Sweet 16 contenders to see, do we come up with the same Final Four, which three of our four are still in, and a new same champion, or do we change things? So Nathan, with this second chance opportunity or a second look at the new Sweet 16, what do you have going on in the West region?
Not much changing here. The West was my most accurate. In fact, of all the games played in the West region, I've only missed one, and that was the Oregon-Iowa game. Other than that, I've nailed every single game up to this point. So, as I always say, don't fix what's not broken, right? So, Gonzaga-Creighton, this was a Sweet 16 matchup that I had. I don't see any reason why Gonzaga is going to lose that game. They've been dominant all year. They've been dominant in this tournament. They've only lost one game by single digits this year, and that's to West Virginia, but I don't think West Virginia ever really loses single digits because of their scrappy defense. So anyway, so let's jump to the next game. So Gonzaga's moving on. USC Oregon. Now we talked about how dominant the Pac-12 has been. Now we get to a matchup in the Pac-12. So of course they're all moving forward, so they're going to have to match up here at some point. So I had USC Iowa playing, and I had Iowa moving on. But I'm going to backtrack here. I'm going to look at both of these two teams matching up, and they've matched up once this year, and USC won by 14, 72-58. That plays a big role because I think at this point it's all about matchups. Well, it's always all about matchups, but it's significantly more about matchups, and it's about discipline. And USC is a very disciplined basketball team. I was watching Oregon in that Iowa game. Oregon took advantage of a slower Iowa team, and they were just running up and down the court. They have very scrappy defense, but at the same time, their defense isn't as great, and they tend to be careless at times. So at this point of the tournament, I think that's going to be their downfall. They're going up against someone that knows them very well, unlike Iowa. So I think USC does pull this off and does make it to the Elite Eight and face Gonzaga. And Gonzaga versus USC for the regional final in the West. There's nothing that tells me Gonzaga is not going to continue to move forward in this tournament. So I have Gonzaga beating USC to win the West region and make it to the Final Four. What are your takes on the West?
Very similar to you with the West. This was my most accurate region, so there wasn't a lot of change. I had 3 of the 4 making it to this point, with Iowa being that lone exception. And for me, I'm going to keep Gonzaga. They're going to beat Creighton. Just Gonzaga's been looking really good. They've been taking care of business. Not too much in terms of stumbling blocks going on in that department. And then this comes to USC Oregon, a team that's familiar with each other, as you alluded to in February, played each other, keeping it short and simple. I'm going to stick with USC. It was a team I felt strong about early on when we did our first time tournament picks. I went away from them, and I'm coming back to them. So I believe they will face Gonzaga in the Elite Eight, and I believe Gonzaga will make it to the Final Four. I'm going to stick with them as well. They haven't given me much reason to deviate from them. So that's our picks for the West region. Let's look at the East region. What did you have going on with East, Nathan?
Yeah, it gets a little bit tougher now, I feel like. Florida State looked awfully impressive in Colorado. Even though they had a scare in that first round to UNCG, at one point I feel like you had to come from behind there, but they looked really good against a very hot Colorado team. So, and then Michigan, who squeaked by LSU. It seems like Liver's injury is starting to catch up to them. This is really difficult for me because, of course, I'm just like, do I follow my head or my heart here? Because my head's telling me like, well, we got to think about who's trending the right way, but my heart's telling me Michigan because I don't want to not believe in them anymore. They've come so far and they've done so well. So Michigan is my only exception to the Big Ten teams. Like, I feel like this team is legit. Even without Livers, I still think they're a very, very solid team in this, especially in this region. Florida State, I truly feel like that Colorado game was just a fluke game. I don't think that truly shows how great they are. And plus, seeing the rest of the ACC in this tournament and how poorly they've performed, I can't just keep riding this Florida State train. I think it comes down to discipline and coaching and how good conferences are doing. And right now, both the Big Ten and the ACC are down in this tournament, but Michigan's much more disciplined and a better coach team, in my opinion. Florida State can get careless at times, and I feel like with Michigan's defense, it's one of the best in the nation. I feel like that will cause Florida State a lot of havoc and cause them to turn over. This is going to be a low-scoring game. This is going to be a battle. It's going to be back and forth. But I am going to stick with my guns. I think Michigan does prevail and lives for one more day. Jumping down the UCLA-Alabama game. Now, Alabama was a team that I thought was overhyped, overrated. They really survived a scare to Iona. I honestly thought Iona was going to win that game for the majority of that game. It wasn't until about the 10-minute mark in the second half where Alabama finally started to pull away. And, the back of my mind, I was like, I knew it. Like, this is the Alabama I thought was going to happen. Then they go up against a Maryland team. And, well, we all know Maryland right now. They're part of the Big Ten. And I just don't trust much of the Big Ten at all, minus Michigan. They flew by them. Now they play a UCLA team who has been impressive. They've beat Michigan State in the opening round. They handled BYU easily. They destroyed Abilene Christian. But what I like about this team is how disciplined they are, and people can get after them on defense, and it doesn't phase them. Because they always. I watched this Abilene Christian UCLA game, and I was very intrigued to watch this game because I saw Abilene Christian versus Texas in person, by the way, which was an awesome game. I'm so glad we went to that game now, even though I was a little disappointed we got it. It was one of the best games of the first round, but what made them win that game, I think it was the lowest scoring game in the first round, was their defense was so suffocating. They force over 20 turnovers a game, which is in the top like 3 in the nation. And Texas could not handle that. But when they applied that to UCLA, like it didn't phase them. UCLA was so impressive, and they were my initial Pac-12 championship pick before I flopped to Oregon. So I still love this team a lot. It's the old Cincinnati coach that coaches them, which I think he did a really good job when he was in Cincinnati, and he has a really good team. And I think they're trending the right way. The Pac-12 is trending the right way. I'm not going to forget about Bama's scare in the first round. I don't trust them, and I feel like Bama is scrappy. They're going to play good defense, but UCLA is going to control this game, and they're going to handle Alabama, and they're going to move on. So I've got Michigan versus UCLA. This is going to be the matchup of some amazing basketball. I'm going to look forward to this matchup if it occurs. Michigan versus UCLA, two very well-coached teams, two very disciplined teams, and I love those two aspects going forward in this tournament. But I'm going to continue to stick with Michigan here. I think the extra game that UCLA has played, they're going to start trending, maybe a little bit more fatigue. They're going to get a little bit more careless, especially going up against that Michigan defense, who's really good. So I'm going to bet Michigan to win the East and go on to the Final Four. What do you got?
Yeah, the East right now, another part of the bracket where I have fairly intact in terms of picks we made earlier. The Florida State Michigan one was the one you and I projected the last show, and this is really the one that kind of makes our bracket for our original picks, like for our group contest to see which one of us will end up having more points, because this will be a big swing one, besides the other matchup, but this is a more direct one. And this Michigan Florida State, like we said before, I feel like this is going to be an excellent game. It's going to be a superb game. I mean, at this point, you're not going to have too many stinkers in terms of games. So this one, though, it will be very interesting to see how they adapt. And I think the Los Livers, this is where it catches up, because Florida State does like the pressure. They do like to be in your face. I understand that Michigan is a quality team. They do take care of the ball. And I'm just going to stick with my guns, honestly. I really think I could see this game going either way with Michigan or Florida State. I won't be surprised if Michigan wins, but I originally picked Florida State to win, and I'm going to stick with my guns for that particular game and just say Florida State's going to win it, just be on the pure merit of that's who I said the first time. And I like to be right sometimes. Looking at the second game, UCLA, Alabama. UCLA has had an impressive run. However, Alabama's been a team I've been sticking with, I've been hitching my wagon to, and they haven't let me down. And like you said before, attrition's going to set in at some point with these teams. They are battling tough matchups. Granted, UCLA did blow out Albany Christian, but Alabama did that with Maryland as well. So with that in mind, I'm just going to stick with what I had before with Alabama and Florida State making it to the Elite Eight. It's what I had before. I felt strongly about it, and I'm not going to second guess myself, just like on an exam. You put it down the first time, a lot of times your first instinct is what you stick with. And that's what I'm going to do here. And quite honestly, when we get to Florida State, Alabama, I think Florida State, just with their length, their defensive pressure, and Alabama's tendency to make mistakes here and there, I think that gives Florida State the small lead to go into the Final Four against Gonzaga. So Gonzaga and Florida State on that side of the bracket going against each other in the Final Four. What about the South region, Nathan? What do you have going on for the South region?
Yeah, before I get there, we completely disagree there on the East, so that'll be a little fun. Back and forth there during the weekend when they play. So to the South, Baylor Nova. First off, completely surprised if Nova's even here. All the injuries that they've had and everything I said on this show last episode, I feel like that, they're just wanting to move on to next year, and they're done with this year. But they have fight in them. They brought it to Winthrop, who I thought was going to win this game. They brought it to North Texas, who I thought they were going to go. And I had Winthrop versus Purdue here, so I completely whiffed on that. They had the luxury of playing a 12 seed and a 13 seed to get here. Now they get a 1 seed in Baylor, who has looked impressive this tournament so far. So I do think at this point the fatigue and the injuries do come back and bite them in the behind, and it will cost them probably moving forward here on out. I just think Baylor's playing too well, and they've got their full throttle of players. So Baylor moving on. Arkansas, Oral Roberts. What a surprise to see Oral Roberts here, the second 15 seed ever to get to the Sweet 16. It would be awesome to see them move on. I think it's possible, but I was really impressed with Arkansas against Texas Tech. Now, it ended up being close at the end, and that's what Arkansas tends to do. They tend, get streaky on cold or hot spells. I think this one could be really close, but I will pick Arkansas to move on. If Oral Roberts moves on, that'll be impressive. But they've looked extremely good. They've won really close games to Ohio State and Florida. But the fact that they haven't blown either of those teams out, who I think are completely overrated teams, both Ohio State and Florida, I don't think Arkansas is overrated. I like this team a lot, so I have them moving on. So I have Baylor and Arkansas. And this is where my biggest change is going to be. I'm going to pick Baylor to get to the Final Four. Arkansas, though they looked really good against Texas Tech, they just allow people to hang around. And against a team like Baylor, you can't do that. So I'm going to pick Baylor to move on and to beat Arkansas and to represent the South in the Final Four. What do you got?
Yeah, Villanova just has come out in this tournament and showed, like you said, they're not going to go belly up. They're going to give it their all. And they demonstrate that against Winthrop. Now, I do believe the North Texas matchup was the best second matchup they could ideally have in terms of teams to go against. So that gave them a little more confidence and define their identity. And honestly, that's what it feels like they've done since the Big East tournament is they just took time figuring out their team again, finding out who has what role, and they seem to be in a good stride and they seem to be putting it together at this point. Baylor, another team I wasn't too high on coming in. They came in the tournament. They've been taking care of business. So Nova and Baylor, I'm going to go with Baylor in this one. North Carolina really let me down, so I just gotta go with the cards that are here now, and I'm going to say Baylor's going to end up winning against Villanova. Villanova has made me regret giving up on them as soon as I have, but I think Baylor ends up putting them away for this season. Good run for them, but I think it ends here at the Sweet 16. Next, Arkansas and Oral Roberts. Oral Roberts, without a shadow of doubt, the surprise of the tournament, in my opinion. Wrecked everyone's brackets for the most part. 95 point, I want to say 2% of brackets went from being perfect in that one shot, or in that one game, I should say. Great season, but I see it ending here. I think Arkansas does enough to put them away. Arkansas may leave the door open for them to inch close, but I also would not be surprised for it to be a blowout. I know I'm playing both sides of the coin, but that's kind of how Arkansas plays. They either blow the doors off you or they make it so nail biting you that you have nubs left. But I think Arkansas ends up winning that matchup. So we have Baylor versus Arkansas here for the Elite Eight matchup. And again, pick integrity in me wants me to stick with Arkansas. I believed in them at the beginning of the tournament. Yes, they let Texas Tech sneak back in, but Texas Tech wasn't a slough of a team. They are a legitimate team. They are a team that people had high hopes for and expectations. And I mean, they almost made it to Sweet 16. So obviously they didn't fall short in some regard to that. So I'm going to stick with Arkansas making it to the Final Four, beating Baylor. How about the Midwest region, Nathan? The one that has caused complete chaos for everyone. What do you have going on in the Midwest?
Yeah. Oh, first off, congrats to sticking with your guns. I folded on Arkansas there. Baylor's looked too good, and I couldn't stick with Arkansas there. But I'm glad you did. We'll see how they do. But jumping to the next region here, I mean this is mayhem region right here. So three of the four teams are 8 seed or lower. So Loyola versus Oregon State. In some brackets I had Loyola beating Illinois. In all my brackets, I had Illinois losing in this round. I didn't think they'd get past the Sweet 16. Some I had them losing earlier to Loyola. So Oregon State, no way I had them going this far because I obviously had Oklahoma State going far. So this is tough because Oregon State, They've been on a tear. They won the Pac-12 tournament. They look so good, but there's something about Loyola that you just can't pick against them. I mean, last time we had a tournament 2 years ago, Loyola made it to the Final Four as 11 seed. They're back in it, and they haven't slowed down at all. I mean, they just look just as good, if not better. I mean, they handled Illinois like it wasn't even close. It was a double digit lead from the beginning, and it just never got past that. And so it's hard for me to pick this game, but I'm gonna go with Loyola. I think there's something magical about them. I think the Pac-12 will start to drop off a bit moving forward, but I'm going to go with Loyola to win this. They have unfinished business to take care of from last tournament, and I think that magic continues. The next game, Houston-Syracuse. I mean, this is a typical when there's an 11 in front of Syracuse in the NCAA tournament. I mean, it's an automatic Sweet 16 bid. Every time they're 11th seed in this tournament, whether they're a playing game or what, they're always finding a way. And this is why you alluded to this earlier. You know what? When you get to a college team, you do something really well, and people can't figure it out. Like you're gonna go far. And Syracuse's 2-3 zone is just like that. But in conference play, the rest of ACC teams see Syracuse all the time. They know this zone very well. They've studied so much film of it. They've had so much experience with it that they know how to break it. So that's why Syracuse's record is never the best. But they always find a way to get far in the tournament because they're facing teams that typically don't see a 2-3 zone. More specifically, Syracuse's 2-3 zone, which is a perfected zone. So that's why they're here. And the teams that I've noticed in the past that have really struggled with Syracuse's zones are very athletic, fast-paced, fast-break teams. San Diego State was that sort of team. West Virginia is that sort of team. Houston is that sort of team. And Houston doesn't play Syracuse all the time. I think Houston's a little overrated. Almost got beat by probably the worst Big Ten team in this tournament. And they should have lost, but they came back and won. I mean, imagine if Rutgers have won. We'd have an 8, a 12, a 10, 11 in the Sweet 16 in that region. It's unbelievable. But I think Syracuse is going to win, and I think they're going to win very easily. They're shooting lights out. They're hot right now. Buddy Boeheim is looking like one of the best players in the country. And I don't think Houston's going to handle this zone very well. They're going to struggle like West Virginia, like San Diego State. And they're going to move on, I think, with ease. And it'll be Syracuse versus Loyola. Loyola's magic will continue. And I think Loyola does figure out that Syracuse zone because they figure everybody out immediately, regardless if they've never played them. If they can get past Oregon State, I don't see any reason they can't get past Syracuse. So I have Loyola beating Syracuse in the Elite Eight matchup and going to the Final Four. Who do you got?
Oh, look at you, mid-major, making it to the Final Four. In the Midwest, this region was just hard in terms of picks. I think this is where a lot of everyone's pick'em brackets have suffered the most. A lot of different things going on. As you mentioned before, Oregon State, a phenomenal tear, especially behind the arc. They've been sinking it and doing a great job of just punishing teams, honestly, just making those shots and getting up big and making teams lose their identity. And they know what they want to be, and they're going to do it. Loyola, I didn't have much faith in coming into the tournament, but they've definitely done their homework. They've put their nose to the grindstone, so to speak, and just taking care of business. They've done a great job. Them and Oregon State, that should be a fascinating game to see how those styles come together. And with time to study film, I feel like both teams will come in with a game plan to take out the best punch of the other and to have the best counter they can come up with. But in the end, I think Oregon State will find a way to sneak past Loyola and end up in the Elite Eight. On the other side, Syracuse does have a very good zone, and they have been shooting phenomenal. Had they been the next day or only one day in between, I feel like Syracuse would blow the doors off of Houston. However, because there's time for preparation, time to get things figured out. Yes, I know Boeheim is a legendary coach, and he has figured a lot of teams out, and he sticks to what he knows, and he has his team execute it very well. I had Houston going to Elite Eight, and I'm going to stick to those guns. I think Houston finds a way around Syracuse, even though Syracuse is playing well. I think Houston, with the time and preparation that they have, will find a way around Syracuse and make it to the Elite Eight. And then I have Oregon State against Houston. I feel like Oregon State will keep firing away. I didn't have Houston making it to the Final Four. I'm not going to sneak them in now. I'll have Oregon State making it. So I have one Pac 12 team ending up in the Final Four because all the others I've eliminated through some other reason or rationale. So I'll put Oregon State in the Final Four, leaving that side of the bracket being Arkansas versus Oregon State for that matchup. So, Nathan, let's remind the audience of our Final Four. Who are your Final Four based on this reseeded or re-picked Sweet 16 brackets?
Yes, on the left side, my two teams stay the same. I got Gonzaga and Michigan. But on the right side, I did change a little bit. Instead of Arkansas, I'm picking Baylor now. Instead of Oklahoma State, because they're obviously eliminated, I am now picking the mid-major Loyola Chicago University. And your Final Four were?
My Final Four stayed the same on the left side of the bracket, Gonzaga and Florida State. Kept them there, stayed pat. And on the other side of the bracket, I stuck with Arkansas, and I brought up Oregon State because Illinois is out. So I had to go with someone new. So who do you have winning, Nathan?
Yeah, so we only match on one right now, and that's Gonzaga. The other three we disagree on. So Gonzaga, Michigan, I'm going to stick with my guns here. Those are the two regions I've done the best on. So let's just continue to stick with what I've been guessing. Nothing slowing Gonzaga down. They're going to win, and they're going to move on to the championship. Now let's go to the more interesting matchup that I have. I have Baylor and Loyola. Like I said, Loyola's got unfinished business, and this is the furthest I have Baylor going. I think they've looked good, but I do ultimately think the Big 12 is a little overrated. And I think Loyola is legit. They may have the best coach in this tournament, if not the nation. Who knows? I mean, they were here 2 years ago as an 11 seed, and now they're here again. This reminds me of like Brad Stevens, Brad Stevens' Butler team. This is what this reminds me of. And he was the best coach in those tournaments. And now look at him. He's coaching the Boston Celtics. Like Loyola Chicago is that new Butler team who goes to back-to-back Final Fours. And I think Loyola moves on. I think they beat Baylor. And they play in the championship. I know that sounds crazy, but like I said, it's happened before with Butler. And why can't it happen again, And so I have Gonzaga and Loyola in the championship. By the way, to my audience out there, this is what my wife picked to be in the championship right now. And when she picked that, I tried not to laugh at her. But here I am re-picking the Sweet 16, and I have her championship pick in my finals. So this is crazy. I regret any sort of laughter that I made inside my little head. But I'm going with my wife. They always say your wives are never wrong. So I have to go all in with what my wife said. Gonzaga versus Loyola, and Gonzaga prevails and wins the national championship and goes undefeated. Who do you got?
Well, I have 3 of my 4 coming back, just mostly sticking to my guns, even though matchups may have changed along the way. I have Gonzaga versus Florida State. Gonzaga prevails. They just have everything going in their favor, and I believe they'll make the national championship from that side. Arkansas, and I have Oregon State making it on that side. I have Arkansas actually winning that matchup. At some point, Oregon State's going to hit that wall. I think they luck out with the region they're in based on who's left and everything, and they made it to the Final Four, but I believe Arkansas ends up beating Oregon State at that point. So now I have Gonzaga and Arkansas going against each other. I have Gonzaga versus Arkansas in the national championship, and I'm going to stick with the Bulldogs. Gonzaga, I believe they finished the season, win that championship. Yeah, so in the end, Nathan and I ended up sticking with the same champion, which, I mean, probably isn't too big of a surprise. If your champion isn't eliminated, for the most part, I would say pretty well everyone picking would stick with their champion, whoever they felt strong for.
Yeah, the left side I think is of that bracket is going to be pretty predictable. It's just that right side. I mean, like I said, if Rutgers would have ended up holding that lead to Houston, that bottom right region would just be unbelievably difficult or unbelievably chaos right now, and who knows what to expect there. But I'm on the Loyola bandwagon. I think Gonzaga is going to finish the season undefeated, And I'm excited. A whole weekend of basketball again, so I'm looking forward to it. But I'll be watching it from home. I'm not going back to Indy for those.
We're going to put a bow on this episode. Any final words, Nathan, before we wrap this up?
No, let's continue March Madness. I love this time of year.
Yes, and I can't be understated how grateful we are to only have one game that was affected. Wish it was no games affected by COVID, but it was great to see that the tournament, for the most part, ran pretty smooth, went pretty well as planned. And so hopefully it continues that way and we can enjoy more of March Madness and see our champion crowned, whether it's the one we pick or someone else. We'll see how it unfolds. But for now, we'll see who makes it to the Final Four. So until we talk to everyone next time, thank you for tuning in. This has been Nathan Singer, Nick Alvarez. We are the Sports Forecasters, and we'll see you next time.